Welcome to the Logic Model webinar. Today I'm going to introduce you to the logic models that we used, the logic model template used as part of the OurPlace program, and I'll give you clear instruction on how you can produce one for yourself. I'll first begin by giving you a bit of a background on the OurPlace program and introduce you to the theory of change before I go on to describe how to use our particular logic model template. So the OurPlace program gives communities more power over local services and budgets in their neighbourhoods, allowing them to align these with all of the other resources that communities can bring. Through the OurPlace program, the government is encouraging communities to develop innovative new ways of delivering local services, and grants have been made available to help communities to develop their plans. However, before these plans become reality, OurPlace, all the areas on the OurPlace program were requested to complete a logic model to demonstrate that their proposals are based on a clear analysis of what's wrong locally and how this can be changed. They were also asked to describe how the effectiveness of their proposal will be monitored once they have been implemented, and this was all demonstrated in a logic model. To date, all 180 organisations involved in the OurPlace program have developed a logic model. And the logic model that we used is based on a theory of change, which I will now go on to speak about. So we all recognise that community organisations work incredibly hard, so it's no surprise that they can sometimes be so focused on their day-to-day activities that they lose sight of what they're trying to achieve. When they do try to think about their goals or try to measure their impact, they can struggle. And a theory of change can help organisations to refocus, weigh up their priorities and begin to measure their impact, ultimately allowing them to get more out of the resources they have and help more people. A theory of change shows an organisation the path it needs to take from needs to activities to outcomes to impact. It describes the change that you want to make and the steps involved in making that change happen. Theories of change also depict the assumptions that lie behind your reasoning, and where possible, your theory of change should be backed up by evidence. This might be local research, it might be national research, it might be information you have gathered yourself. Either way, a good theory of change can reveal whether your activities make sense, given the goals you're trying to achieve, whether there are things you do that do not help you achieve your activity. So is there any wasted resource that is not being used to achieve your activity? A good theory of change will advise you on which activities and outcomes you can achieve alone and which you cannot achieve alone, where you might need support from your local communities. Some partner communities can be statutory organisations, can be voluntary or community-based organisations. And a good theory of change will help you to measure your impact. Theories of change are often shown in the diagram form, and this allows you to see the links between all of the steps. We recognise that the world of community organisations is in fact very complex, messy, and sometimes impossible to reflect comprehensively in a diagram. But this is where the theory of change approach has real value. It does force you to take a clear, simple view, crystallising your work into as few steps as possible to capture the key aspects of what you do. The theory of change that has been used on the OurPlace program is a logic model. The logic model is cyclical, and it helps you explain your project at each stage, and it helps you plot each cycle of change and each stage of development. And the logic model is about showing what's wrong locally and why, explaining the steps you plan to take to rectify these issues, and describing the outcomes if the steps are successful. Using this template, I'll now go on to explain in detail how to complete each part of your logic model and describe the information you need to populate each section of the template. At the end of the webinar, there will be a link to a website where you can download all of this information and download a blank template of the logic model. So we'd ask you to start with the conditions. So this is asking you to provide information about what's going on locally. So this should give readers who are unaware of your local area a quick understanding of the challenges your local area faces and the policies that already exist to tackle these challenges and what needs to happen for these challenges to be overcome. In detail, the section should provide evidence of issues within the local area. Examples would be data on local unemployment rates or data of ill health. And you should provide evidence on how this issue is worse, more pressing than in other areas, and how it might be getting worse over time. We then ask you to go on to summarise the local and national policies that are influencing how local areas think and respond to an issue. For example, what are the relevant strategic aims of your local council or of your local NHS organisation? And then we'd ask you to explain how these challenges can be overcome. For example, do local residents and service providers need to adopt new attitude towards the role of the public sector? Do people need to be better informed about services? The next part of your logic model should really detail the nuts and bolts of your proposal, telling people what resources you have, what you will be doing with these resources, and how many people will benefit. First of all, set out the high-level objectives, and these will be a distillation of the outcomes, which we'll come on to talk about a bit later on. So your objectives should be a distillation of the outcomes you're hoping to achieve for your residents, plus perhaps some process improvements amongst your partners. Then we'd ask you to go on and describe the rationale. So why have you designed the delivery of your program as you have? Why will the problem not go away if things are left as they are? And to illustrate, your proposal may involve combining several services in one building so that residents find it easier and quicker to access the range of services they need. Alternatively, you may be planning to set up a website which enables people to shape the design of local services, because research you've done has found that people are currently unaware of how they can influence service design and would like an online solution. Moving on to the input box, this is important that you describe everything you have at everything you have available locally to help you deliver your project. We'd ask you to list the funding, staffing and equipment facilities that you have to help you deliver your program. And we would suggest you include the fund staff of all of the agencies working in your partnership, and don't forget to list the in-kind support. There are generally two types of in-kind support, and the first is volunteers, and these are people from your local community who give freely of their time. They may be professionals, there may be people wanting to develop skills, but please don't forget to include volunteers in your inputs. The second type of payment in kind is for space. So if you're getting a free training room, or if you're getting access to free equipment or other resources, then please list this, because these can be measured financially. We then go on to ask you to describe your activities, and this is to tell the reader what you'll be doing with these inputs. Will you be running events, or will you be arranging training days? Will you be setting up a website? Think about all of the activities that will help you reach your goal, and it's important to make sure you list everything you plan to do. So include events, include support sessions, include debt advice sessions, whatever you're doing, please make sure you include it in your activities. So the next stage will be to describe your activities, and this is an opportunity for you to tell the reader what you will be doing with the inputs that you have. Will you be running events or arranging training days? Will you be setting up a website? So it's important to make sure you list everything you plan to do, and this includes support sessions, debt advice sessions, and please make sure that you record how many of those sessions you're going to be running. So as we'll come on to later, we would ask you to be very specific about the volume of activity you're planning on doing. So then the last part of the program objectives is the outputs, and these are the measurable or quantifiable results of your proposal, expressed in the goods and services produced in the short term as a consequence of your activity. For example, a proposal may involve buying 50 places in a training course, or recruiting 10 volunteers, or holding 3 community events. These are the things that you will be able to measure. And it's important that these are made absolutely clear in your logic model. The next part, and perhaps the biggest part of the logic model template, is to describe the intended outcomes. So if your proposal is a success, then residents and organisations are going to be attending events, courses, accessing new sources of information, receiving advice on various topics. But what's going to be the wider, medium and longer term consequences of these activities and outputs? So you'll need to list these consequences in your outcomes box. And examples of outcomes would be improvement in residents' long-term health, young people entering sustained employment, closer working between different public agencies and the voluntary sector, more local people volunteering, and people feeling they have a greater say in their local service delivery. So if the consequences you've identified in your outcomes box do materialise, then you should be having a positive impact upon the wider contextual factors that you've identified at the start of your logic model. So give an example of an impact. If, for example, you set up a program that generates 50 apprenticeships with local businesses, the outcome of this is 50 young people entered sustained employment, whereas the impact is a reduction in the local youth unemployment rate. We do recognise that there will have been other factors that have influenced the local youth employment rate, but your programme would have played a role. Other examples of impacts would be lower hospital admission rates, increased local volunteering rates, and a higher percentage of people who say they feel connected to their neighbourhood. I now want to go on to describe the difference between outcomes and impacts and help you understand what they are. People often struggle to understand the difference between an outcome and an impact. And this is because the terms are sometimes used interchangeably and often provided without an accompanying definition. So it may be easier to think of outcomes as the things that you will be measuring. Think of the impacts as the things other people will be measuring, and that's changes in headline statistics that local authorities or health agencies may record. Also, impacts should link back to the contextual evidence you presented in your first logic model box. So try to think about outputs as the things you do, outcomes as things that happen, and the impact is the benefit to your local community. We're now going to talk about what's required to produce a good logic model. We'd advise you to start with the local context. What's the problem and why? And make this clearly attributable to local research. We would advise you to produce the logic model as a group exercise. By involving as many people as possible from as wide a range of organisations and groups, you'll get the maximum number of views on what exactly a proposal involves and what it's seeking to achieve. Staff from other organisations may understand how the proposal might affect the issues they encounter on a daily basis, but they may be less aware of how the proposal will affect the wider issues within the community. Having as many people around as possible when completing your logic model will help you to understand the full picture of how many organisations and individuals will be giving time and resources to support the proposal. A good logic model should include as many numbers and figures as possible. Having these in place will help you to understand and demonstrate the scale of the issues your proposal is seeking to tackle. It will help you to judge whether you have enough staff and funding to deliver your proposal or whether you need to make a more targeted approach. And think about what would happen if these numbers go up or down. Do you have a plan B in place to support more people, seek alternative funding, or change focus? And the final part would be to test it with your peers. Ask them whether what you're proposing is plausible. Is it clear to them? And do they understand how the way you will deliver your proposal will lead to the outcomes you are targeting? Sharing the logic model should also help you to identify other complexities and relationships that may have been a bearing both on the current situation and what you hope to achieve. Following this identification, you may decide to alter your plans. So some hints and tips. When producing your logic model, we would really encourage you to identify a realistic and definite goal. This goal is the end point of the theory of change and the ultimate aim of the program. It's important the goal is really clear and realistic. If it's not clear, the logic model will tend to descend into every possible activity and outcome that could happen, which is not helpful for thinking about the appropriate strategy. We'd also advise you to work backwards from the goal to work out the intermediate outcomes. The participants, if you're having a workshop to produce your logic model, would have to work through each step backwards, asking what has to happen in order for this to be achieved. we'd advise you to establish the links between outcomes and their order by working out causes and effect. It's important to go through the links in detail, questioning whether one outcome really leads to the next and the reason for believing that. Work out which activities lead to which outcomes, and this is generally quite straightforward, and this will be illustrated in some of the logic models that are available on the mycommunity.org.uk website, which I'll refer to later on, and identify what else is needed for the intervention to work. And a good way to think about this is to work out what would completely derail your intervention or derail your project or derail your program. And this can reveal important enabling factors such as which stakeholders have to be on board. So I'll now go on to describe the positives of using the logic model. A lot of the RPlace areas who've produced a logic model have reported that it's very good to use to promote your project to funders and potential partners, as it's very concise and very easy to read. It'll immediately enlighten somebody about the project that you're planning. It clearly outlines exactly what you're proposing. Due to the lack of space, there's very little room for waffle, and you have to decide what stays in and what stays out. And generally speaking, what stays in is the important stuff. And it clearly maps the process involved to reach your goals. It's cyclical, it's logical. It also describes what you will measure and how. This includes financial resources, this includes number of outputs and number of deliverables, and it's easy to adapt as local conditions change. So for more information, you can go to mycommunity.org.uk/program/RPlace. Before I log off, I do want to show you some examples of the RPlace logic models. These are best practice logic models. These are all available on the myCommunity website. As you can see, the level of detail tells us exactly what this organization is trying to achieve, what the desired outcomes are, and what the intended impacts of the project are. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been of use, and please get in touch with Locality if you need more information.